All right, now that we have the basic functionality up and running, we're going to need to add in a web service because we want to get the current stock price. And the best way to get the current stock price is to ask somebody who knows the current stock price. In this case, we are going to use the Market on Demand web service that they have graciously allowed us to use to make some requests and fill in some stock information, specifically on the customer show view. So for now, let's pop open the customer show view, and we already have a header here for current price. So we've added that in the past, but notice down here in the actual table, we've got an empty table there. So we have stock symbol, stock number of shares, but we don't have a way to input the current price because currently all we have is what we've put into the database. So let's get it. And the place that we're going to get that is in Customer Controller. And the reason we're going to do it in Controller is because all application logic should be done in the controller. We've got Model, View, and Controller, and we're going to put our application logic inside of the controller. So let's open this up and find our customer show function. So notice right now all we're doing is finding a customer, populating all, then executing this function which passes the customer back. So here is where we are going to add that additional functionality. We're still going to return an error if there's any issues, and we're still going to pass it along if there's no customer returned. But if everything works out and we have a good customer object returned, populated with all of the stocks that we've created, the next thing we need to do is call the web service with each of the stock symbols in order to get the current price. So to get information on the APIs, you can head over to the Market on Demand, dev.marketondemand.com, to find that documentation. And you'll notice they have 3 APIs. They have the company lookup API, so if you want to, you can add that functionality when you're adding a stock symbol to double check that you have a valid stock symbol before the user submits that to the database. So you can search the company lookup API that way. Well, the one we're going to be using is a stock quote API, and the stock quote API receives a stock symbol and then returns this information, a name, symbol, last price, change percent, and all of this additional information about the customer. In this case, about the stock. We're just going to be using that last price attribute of this object that's returned. So if you want to, you can read the documentation and look at all of the information that's available. The third API that they have is an interactive chart. If you want to go really nuts, you can pull in this interactive chart and see the latest stock information for all of the stocks that a customer has. It's really, really cool, and it's a really cool API that they provide. You know what? I'm going to lighten up this display a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read. There we go. That's a little bit nicer. So inside of our customer show function, we need to add these web service calls. So this will all go within the function of customer.findOne, because once we find a customer, it's going to execute this function. So the first thing that we need to do is create an HTTP object. And this is going to be what we use to make that web service call. The next thing that we need to do is create a function to get the current stock price. And that is going to have a lot of options. So I'm just going to paste that in here, and then we're going to talk through it. So this function called getCurrentPrice takes one argument called stock. And that stock is going to be the stock object that is then going to be passed in. And I'm just going to comment out some of these lines here for now that we're going to use to debug and figure out what's going on in our application. So we've got a function called getCurrentPrice taking in a stock, and then we're going to create a new object called options that's going to be used along with our HTTP object to make the request. And the options for that are the host, which in this case is dev.marketondemand. That's the machine that we are talking to. And a full API call is up here in a comment. So the host is just the host name, dev.marketondemand.com. We tell it what port to use. If you were using an HTTPS web service that's secured, you would use port 443, and instead of require HTTP, you would require HTTPS right there. The path is everything after the URL, or after the host name, sorry, to all the way up to the stock symbol. And here we're going to take everything up to that, and then we're going to add or concatenate stock.symbol to the end of that string. So remember, we passed in a stock object. Stock.symbol is going to be the stock symbol of that object. So then we're going to request that stock. Next, we need to create that HTTP request. So here we have var web service request. So we're creating a new variable. We're calling it web service request, and we are running http.request. And that runs an HTTP request, which is how we're going to use this get object. And we're going to pass in those options that we just created. And then we're going to pass the response into another function that we haven't yet created called process response. So process response is going to take the response, the web service response, and it's going to take the stock. And so processing response is what we're going to do to take in the data that is returned by the web service, process that, and do something with it. Because right now, all we're going to have is this response object that's just raw data. And then finally, we have to end that web service request. And here's another debug statement that we have. Console.log stock symbol plus, and then we're going to add in an equals, and then we're going to add the stock current price, which is something that we haven't yet created, but we will inside of this process response function. So we're going to paste in our process response function right above get current price. It's not necessarily picky where you put it. JavaScript functions are pretty flexible, but we are going to put it right here above the get current price function that we've already created. And this function that we've created takes that web service response that we're passing right here, right here on line 58, and a stock object. So we're passing in that stock object down from get current price down to this process response. And this, we're going to create an empty string called web service data. And then we're going to do a couple things to process information from that web service response that we've passed down. So first up, we're going to make sure there's not an error. So here I've left in a callback object that we're not going to use yet, so I'm going to get rid of that. So we'll pull that back in later. So first we're going to have web service response, and web service response dot on error will let us do something if there's an error in the web service. So say if we request a non-existent stock symbol, then it'll probably return us an error and we can do something with that. So in this case, we're just going to pass that error to a new function, and we're going to log the message from that to the console. So we'll be able to see and troubleshoot that message from the server end. And next, we're going to do another call, webservice.on data. And this is going to pass in the data from the web service response. And we're going to pass it in here to a function, and we're going to call that object chunk. So this is the data, we're calling it chunk, and we're going to add that to the web service data object that we created up here on line 30. And that, we're adding it to that string that we've already created so that that string will be available to us on the next function here. So the next one, webservice.on end. And this tells us that the web service response is over. We've read everything from that web service response, and we're going to do something with that. And that all of that information, all of the data, is stored in that web service data object. So the first thing we want to do is process that. So we have it as a string, but in order for JavaScript and our code to use that as an object, then we need to parse that. And there's an object, a default function called json.parse. And json.parse takes a string, pulls it out, and turns it into a JSON object that we're going to store in stock data. And then we're going to take stock.currentPrice. Remember, we passed in a stock object. That's going to be, we're going to pass in each stock for a customer. We're going to pass in that stock object and assign a new attribute. Remember, if we check out our customer or our stock model, we don't have an attribute called current price. We've got symbol, we've got number of shares, and we've got an owner. There is no attribute called current price, but it's JavaScript. We could just make stuff up on the fly. So we're going to add an attribute here called current price. And the attribute that we want, or the value that we want to put on that attribute, stock.currentPrice, is the value of stock data dot last price. If we pop back and look at the stock quote API, last price is going to be the most recent price of a given stock. So now we have stock data, the last price, provided by Market on Demand, stored in our stock object as the current price. And then to troubleshoot this, as we're figuring things out, we're going to log that to the console. So we're going to have the stock symbol and then the stock price listed on the console so that we can see what's going on. Because there's a few hiccups and a few hitches that I want you to see in action in JavaScript that we have with JavaScript that you may not see in other languages. So we have everything that we need now in place to get the current stock price, except we're not currently getting the current stock price. So we've created these functions, get current stock price, process response, but we're not calling them anywhere. And so now we need to call it for each stock that we have. And we're going to do that with a for each loop. We're going to pass each stock in customer.stocks. Remember, we have customer.stocks, and that's our array, and that's how we've created on the show view how we've looped through each stock object to create a stock. So customer.stocks is the name of our array, and we can do a for each, and we're going to run a function on each one. And that function is going to be, and we're going to pass each stock to this function. And what our function is going to do is call get current price for that stock. And that's it, because get current price will call process response for us. So we're going to call get current price for each stock, passing those in, and then that will in turn call process response to process the data and add current price as an object, or as a value, as an attribute of this stock object that we've created. And then once that's all done, then we should pass that back to the view. And remember, each of these stocks is stored inside of the customer, so all we have to do is pass the customer object. And remember, each of those stock objects, the stock array, is stored inside of the customer object as customer.stocks. And then we can use that in the view to populate all of that information. So the last thing that we need is to add the current price to our display. And we're going to pop back over here, and I'm just going to copy this line, paste it down below, and pop this out for current price. Remember, because that is the name of the attribute that we added right here in our process response function. So if everything works, we should have stock symbol, number of shares, and the current stock price displayed on our customer show page. So let's run it and see what happens. So then I will pop over to my terminal and run sales lift to start my application. Note, I'm on a new computer here, so I don't have the green button enabled just to start it in the super easy way. So now we can hop on over to, let's open a new tab just in case we need that again, localhost 1337, and we've got our application. And now we've got our customer array, and notice we don't have any customers, so I'm going to hop over here and create a new customer. And I'm going to create a customer called Ryan at email.com from North Dakota. Okay, and now I'm going to add a new stock. Apple, 20 shares, and I'm going to add another stock just for fun. Google, 30 shares. And why not some Microsoft as well? So one more stock. 500 shares of Microsoft stock. And if you'll notice what's happening, every time I hit the show page, some information back here is being run into the console. So I'm going to refresh the page one more time and take note of what's showing up in your console as you refresh the page. First, we have 3 records where the value of the stock is undefined. And if you'll note back in the controller, that is this console.log statement right here. I call it the true test on line 62. And the reason that is showing up, the reason I know it's that one is because this one doesn't have a $sign. So up here on line 41, console.log stock.symbol equals $sign current price, we have the current value, and that's inside of the process response. But down here at our true test, which should be after process response is run, stock.currentPrice is undefined. And if we look at our page, the current price of that stock is still undefined. Why? Why is the stock undefined? Why is the stock price undefined, even though clearly we're successfully pulling back stock prices from the API? The reason for this is that API calls, or specifically HTTP requests, when conducted in JavaScript, are asynchronous requests. Now, what an asynchronous request means is that it's going to make the request, so what an asynchronous request means is that JavaScript is going to pop off the request, it's going to do this HTTP request, and then rather than in a synchronous application, it would wait for the HTTP response to return before continuing to do anything else. But we're not doing that. It's asynchronous. It's going to pop off that request and then continue on doing its thing. So we've got 3 requests. It requests, in this case, I have 3 stocks, Google, Microsoft, and Apple. And it's going to request the Apple stock, the Google stock, the Microsoft stock, and then immediately it's going to move on to the next part of the application before waiting for an HTTP response to come back from the web service. So we're hitting this console.log before stock.currentPrice is created or updated right here on line 40, which also means that we are moving on to the view, the customer show view, before that object is populated, before we have a current price, which is why we're getting undefined on this page. So in order to fix that, we're going to need to tell JavaScript, tell our application, to wait for those responses to come back before we move forward. And to do that, we're going to need to install a new package. And that new package, we could stop our application running. And that new package that we're going to create, or that we're going to add to our async, is called async, aka asynchronous. So we are going to add that new package, and we add a new package and save it as a dependency by calling npm install --save async. And then we're going to install that new application, or that new dependency, into our application's stuff. And now we have to use it. Once that's done, we can get rid of the terminal. And we're going to have to tell our application to use that new function. And the place that we're going to do that is right here in customer.stocks.forEach. So currently we are using the default JavaScript for each loop to loop through this array of stocks and get the current price. We're going to use a new function called async.each. Now, async.each is a new for each loop. And what it allows us to do is hold the execution of some code until each of these calls has completed and has been completely finished. So we're going to pass in customer.stocks, which is the array. And you'll notice right below, it says we have an array, we have an iterator, which is the function that we're going to call on each of the objects. And then we have a callback. And the callback is an optional argument that is the function that you want to run after all of the iterator calls have completed. So our iterator in this case is get current price. And we don't have to tell it to pass a stock. It's going to automatically pass each of the objects from this array, each stock, as an argument to the getCurrentPrice object. And we will come back to the callback that is completed. So what is passed to getCurrentPrice are actually two things. I told you that it passed you a stock because that's the first thing that's going on. So customer.stocks, it's pulling out each stock, it's passing those to getCurrentPrice. The other thing it passes, and we're going to have to add a new argument here, is called a callback. And a callback is it's a function that you call to tell async.each that we're done executing what we need to accomplish. So getCurrentPrice receives now two arguments, stock and callback. So the place that we need to call that callback is actually down inside of process response. Because remember, these console.log statements worked. These console.log statements down here inside of getCurrentPrice did not. So it's actually inside of process response that we want that callback to be called. So we're going to need to add a new argument to process response as well. So we're going to pass in that callback, and we're going to receive the callback right here. So this allows us to pass that callback that's actually initially getting sent right here. We're taking that and we're passing it into getCurrentPrice right here, and then we're passing it into process response, receiving it here, and now we're finally going to call the callback. And the callback function, like I said, each object gets its own unique callback function, and in here we're calling them all callback. So the first thing that we're going to do is callback if there's an error, and we can pass that error back. And we're going to pass a new message called error plus e.message. And that allows us to see what the error is that happens. And we're going to do something with that error in the final callback back in 69 in the async.each. Finally, but that callback only happens if there's a problem, if there's an issue. We can also call it right here. So right inside our web service response.on end, we're going to call that callback function. And what that does, when that function is called, then async.each knows that that iteration of getCurrentPrice is complete. And remember, it's not going to move on until all iterations of getCurrentPrice are completed. So it's going to call all three, in this case, all three getCurrentPrice calls, but then we're going to sit and we're going to wait for those functions to come back before we continue. So the last thing we need to do is tell it what to do, tell async.each what to do when all of the console.log, or when all of the callbacks have been called. And that we're going to create a new function and we're going to receive an object, a potential argument called error. And inside of this function, we're going to say if there's an error, we're going to log that error to the console. And that error would be passed, if there was one, that's going to be passed right here inside of the web service response error. So if you're having problems, if you're running into issues, if your application's not working and you're not getting things the way you want to, check out that console and make sure that you're not getting errors there. So if there's an error, we're going to log that error, and we're going to add a new console.log, done. And console.log done will show us in the console that everything has been completed. Now these console.log statements, we're going to leave those in for debugging. When you're pushing your application out to production, you're going to want to get rid of those, potentially. So the last thing that we need to do is, after all of the stock objects have been populated, we do our rest.view. And we can just copy and paste it from down here. We'll add a semicolon to the end, and we will get rid of that customer.stocks.forEach that we originally had. So now we have a new function, async.each, that calls each stock, calls getCurrentPrice on each stock, and waits for all of those to complete before returning that information to the view. So now I can run sales lift, and if I refresh my page, all of those current stock prices are now populated. So the issue before we used async.each, was that the customer object was being passed to the view before those current stock prices were populated. Now that we've used async.each, everything is working fine. So we're going to get rid of this console.log statement, and we can comment out our other ones. Might want to leave them leave them there so we can use them next time, or if we run into any trouble. And we are done. We are now calling the web service.